Carlsbad Caverns National Park. I'm Brad Kincaid.
And I'm Emily Baker. We'll be joining you as you experience one of the most magnificent natural treasures in the world. You'll see things you'll remember for the rest of your life, sights unlike anything else in the world. Early visitors came into Carlsbad Cavern for the same reason as you, to see this fabulous underground world. Back then, the trip was a lot more difficult. There wasn't much of a trail. Visitors had to climb up, over, and around the rocks. It wasn't until 1929 that the National Park Service blasted a tunnel under the Devil's Hump, where we walk today.
Jim White named a lot of sites in the cave Devil. After all, it was a big, dark hole in the ground, and it was probably pretty scary. Guano miners and tourists had their suspicions about what might be lurking down here. They were probably a little worried about getting lost or that their lights would go out. The tourists knew that Jim White was the only one who knew the way in and out of the cave. If something happened to him, there was nobody who would be able to come in and find them. A cave tour in those days was a real adventure.
And awe-inspiring. Just wait till you see what's up ahead. Let's listen to Park Ranger Michael Connolly.
Think about when you got out of your car today, you looked down to the south, and you saw this empty space out there. You're looking out towards Texas to the south. Picture yourself looking onto the ocean, looking onto the sea. Except rather than us standing on top of a mountain, that we're basically in a boat right above a reef of sea creatures. And that your boat would be floating amongst a lot of algae and a lot of photosynthetic organisms that live right along the edge of a beach, which is not too far from here. And so we're going to be diving into this reef of sea creatures as we go down the natural entrance.
Imagine waves of an ancient ocean lapping at your feet. Of course, the Chihuahuan Desert is the wettest desert in North America, but it only gets 10 to 12 inches of rain a year. We may even get some snow. Diane Dobos-Bubno, biologist, elaborates.
I think people equate deserts with deserted or barren lands. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about the Chihuahuan Desert is it's not. In fact, it's the most diverse desert in North America. Carlsbad Caverns National Park has over 120 species of grasses just in the park. And it has 1,000 plant species. If you compare that to like Rocky Mountain National Park, which has a little bit over 200 species of plants. It's 5 times as many just in the park itself. And Carlsbad Caverns National Park is 47,000 acres.
Those stucco buildings across the canyon were built in the early 1940s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. That was a Depression-era government program that taught young men job skills, all for $30 a month. The stone buildings were built by employees of the National Park Service in the 1920s and 1930s. Most of the buildings are used as offices.
Carlsbad Cavern was designated by President Calvin Coolidge as Carlsbad Cave National Monument in 1923, just 11 years after New Mexico became a state. Congress changed the site's designation in 1930 to Carlsbad Caverns National Park.
Before the federal government came along, ranchers, guano miners, and others knew about the cave. But it wasn't until 1923, the year it was designated a national monument, that people began to really pay attention to the cavern.
Even back then, people realized just how special this place is, and that the National Park Service could give it the protection that it deserves, while letting people like us enjoy it.
Up ahead, a park ranger is going to remind us about the rules before going into the cave.
No food, no candy, no gum, no chewing tobacco. You don't chew. No smoking of anything in the cavern. No flavored beverages. Plain water's fine. Everything else you need to leave up here. I do have a little gray bucket over there if you've got anything in your mouth right now. You need to deposit it before you head down. Any of those other no-nos, if they're open, I need you to put them in the little brown trash can over there. Please keep your speaking voices down. A normal speaking voice will carry about 1/4 of a mile in the cavern. What that means is, I'm going to hear you 5 to 10 minutes before I see your bright, shining face. So you just might want to keep it down a little bit. I told you you couldn't touch any of the formations in the cavern, and I truly meant that. But right up here, you'll walk right by it when you go to the natural entrance. I do have a sacrificial stalactite. You can go ahead and touch that one up all you want, hug it, kiss it, love it up, get it out of your system before you go down. After that, don't touch anything in the cave except the handrails.
While it's obvious that Native Americans knew about the cave, we don't know if they actually ventured inside. Before this trail existed, there was a dangerous drop into the entrance, and to go any distance into the cave, they would have needed torches. Since we haven't found evidence of torches or any other cultural material, it's probably safe to assume that Native Americans never went any further than the entrance.
A big dark hole in the ground may have held religious significance, whether or not they ever actually went inside. Up ahead, we'll see evidence of other smaller groups that do enter the cave. If you see something flying around the cave entrance, most likely it's birds, not Carlsbad Caverns' famous bats.
This colony of cave swallows was established in 1966. With several thousand birds, it's the largest known colony of cave swallows in the U.S. Let's listen to Park Ranger Michael Connolly.
Something I noticed about those birds that fly around, they arrive back here in spring, probably early March or late February. When we get down the steps of the cave, you'll see hundreds of nests up in the ceiling. And they just leave the nest there and come back probably to the same nest or something very similar. I love watching the birds circle around the natural entrance. It's all they do all day, circle around and around and around.
Each November the birds fly south, but by mid-February they return. We call the cave swallows the day shift because they eat insects throughout the day. After dark, the bats fly out and take over the night shift.
During the bat flight programs each summer evening, you can sit in this amphitheater and watch as hundreds of thousands of bats leave the cave in a giant cloud. Check out the program time in the visitor center. Please remember, no flash photography during the bat flight program.
Bats eat tons of insects each night and produce great fertilizer. And they led early explorers to the cave. In the late 1800s, Jim White noticed the huge cloud of bats on the horizon. They led him to begin what became a lifetime of exploring the cave.
Jim White was a 16-year-old cowboy working on one of the local ranches. The story goes that one day he noticed what he thought was smoke off in the distance, so he went to check it out. As he got closer to the smoke, he noticed that it broke apart into little pieces. Of course, it wasn't smoke Jim was seeing. It was bats.
He looked at the huge cloud of bats and the large gaping entrance and thought, if there's that many bats coming out of a hole that big, that must be one huge hole. He made up his mind that some way, somehow, he was going to explore that hole.
He built a ladder out of sticks and old wire, and with only a homemade lantern for light, he made the first of what would be hundreds of trips into the cave.
That was an adventure. None of those early explorers had the paved trails, electric lights, handrails, elevators, or rangers to help them along like we do. Imagine taking a tour here 75 years ago, walking among magnificent formations, but only being able to see them by the dim glow of your lantern.
I'm trying to imagine walking all the way in, and then 4 or 5 hours later, walking all the way back up.
I'm glad we won't have to do that today.
Me too. 250 million years ago, the Delaware Sea covered the land here.
That ancient ocean eventually dried up, and the reef was covered by silt and wind-blown sediment. The reef, now limestone, cracked and split under its own weight. The water table was within the reef. Hydrogen sulfide, generated by oil and gas deposits, was carried by water into the limestone. And when the hydrogen sulfide mixed with the oxygen-rich water, acid was created, sulfuric acid.
That's the acid in your car battery, and it's pretty strong stuff. Strong enough to eat away the limestone and leave large cavities. And that's how this cave was formed. The evidence of that is all around us. The chemical reaction produced a byproduct called gypsum, the material in the sheetrock in your house.
There are huge deposits of gypsum all through the cave. We'll see lots of it as we go along the trail.
While this was happening, the reef was still covered with silt and sediment. As the continental plates shifted, they created the Guadalupe Mountains, lifting the limestone out of the acid-filled water. So the acid went to work on a new, lower section of the limestone until another uplift occurred. We'll be walking down through those dissolved sections to a depth of 750 feet.
Look up at the natural entrance. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the rocks there collapsed, allowing fresh, dry air to come into the cave, and letting some unwitting adventurers inside too.
We call this the twilight zone because it's the boundary between daylight and darkness.
The opening can be a natural trap for unwary animals. Long ago, very different animals roamed the surface above the cave. Occasionally, when one approached too near the mouth of the cave, it fell into the entrance and died. Let's listen to Park Ranger Jeff Axel.
As much as this cave is a scenic wonder, it's also a natural museum. This cave has been watching the world go by for about 1 million years, and in that time it has seen a lot change here in this corner of southeast New Mexico. Paleobotanists are scientists that study the plants of the past, and they were very surprised to find, digging around in the dirt, pine cones, pine needles, even the pollen grains of raspberry plants. Those plants are not found on the surface today.
The natural trap effect is still a concern, but today it's more of a people problem. Food carried into the cave creates odors that attract animals. Once they get in, they have a tough time getting out, and they often die. That's why we don't allow food or gum into the cave.
It may take a few minutes for your eyes to adjust to the light. We keep the lights dim in the twilight zone to discourage animals that might follow the smell of food, and to prevent the cave swallows from flying farther into the cave. Before long, your eyes will adjust, and you'll see some amazing things. Take a few moments to listen. What do you hear? That dripping is the sound of change, and you can hear it year-round. This is a drip pool, created by rain and snow soaking into the ground and falling into the cave. The rock here stops the water and holds it, so drip after drip after drip, it grows into a drip pool.
The last time this pool was full to the brim was probably around the time of the last ice age. Since drip pools are trapped bodies of water, any contamination has lasting effects. Coins corrode and leave ugly green marks on the bottom of the pool. So please, don't throw coins or trash into the pools.
Water in the cave starts out as rainfall in the desert. It takes about 2 months for a drop of water to get from the surface to this level of the cave. But if there had been a hard rain on the surface 2 months ago, you wouldn't see much of an increase in drips down here. Where a drop of water goes, and when it will make it into the cave, all depends on where the rain falls on the surface.
This cave, in climates past, was probably so active that the sounds of dripping would have resembled a nice spring rain. When you hear dripping, you know the cave isn't dead. It's still active. It's just less active than in the past. The amount of moisture changes in here as a natural part of the life cycle of the cave.
Caves are ancient. They outlast seasons, centuries, and millennia. You might say they easily weather the weather. If you were to come back in 20,000 years, you would almost certainly encounter a very different cave than you see today. So the cave isn't dead, but you can think of it as sort of napping.
And it's breathing too. In a few minutes, you'll feel it.
Stop here a moment, and you might feel air blowing past you. The National Park Service doesn't have to pump air into the cave. The air circulation is natural. Changes in temperature and barometric pressure outside create the airflow.
So you can breathe easy. The exchange of fresh air in the cave is constant. During parts of the year, you can see a light cloud of condensation in this area. That happens when wet air from the cave mixes with dry air from outside. Let's listen to Paul Berger, park hydrologist.
You've got that really large entrance, which is at the bottom of a valley, and the entrance itself is in a depression. So it's essentially a cold air trap. So you have this river of cold air that comes in the natural entrance, goes all the way down to the big room, and although you can't feel it, there's a similar warm river of air running up out of the cave along the ceiling. It's one giant heat pump or air exchange pump that just runs naturally because we have such a large entrance. There's never any danger of there being so many people in here that the CO2 levels get too high. And it's a constant exchange because it doesn't matter how warm it is on the surface, there's still relatively cooler air available that flows down into the cave.
The movement of air in caves may indicate an undiscovered opening. Cave explorers say, where it blows, it goes. That's what led cavers to discover another spectacular cave here in the park back in 1986. From a small, unimpressive opening, Lechuguilla Cave has now been explored to a distance of over 100 miles, one of the longest and most beautiful caves in the country.
We'll tell you more about Lechuguilla Cave later, but next we'll find out more about early explorers and visitors in Carlsbad Cavern. The trail is steep in this area, so be extra careful and use the handrail.
Early visitors came into Carlsbad Cavern for the same reason as you, to see this fabulous underground world. Back then the trip was a lot more difficult. There wasn't much of a trail. Visitors had to climb up, over, and around the rocks. It wasn't until 1929 that the National Park Service blasted a tunnel under the Devil's Hump, where we walk today.
Jim White named a lot of sites in the cave Devil. After all, it was a big, dark hole in the ground, and it was probably pretty scary. Guano miners and tourists had their suspicions about what might be lurking down here. They were probably a little worried about getting lost or that their lights would go out. The tourists knew that Jim White was the only one who knew the way in and out of the cave. If something happened to him, there was nobody who would be able to come in and find them. A cave tour in those days was a real adventure.
And awe-inspiring. Just wait till you see what's up ahead. This cave is huge. But Carlsbad Cavern is not the largest cave in the world. The longest cave in the world is Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, more than 350 miles long. The deepest cave is in the nation of Georgia, over a mile deep. And the largest cave room ever found is in Borneo, but it lacks any decoration. Most park visitors tell us that Carlsbad Cavern is one of the most beautiful places on Earth.
Or in the earth. There are very few places in this cave that are not highly decorated. Although the cave is mostly one color, white from the calcite, the other colors are more surprising and rewarding because they're so rare. The orange you see comes from iron, and manganese leaves a black or dark gray residue.
Dripping water is the sound of the cave formations growing. Water in the cave starts out as rainfall. So speleothems start out as rainfall too, in a way. Rainwater trickles down through vegetation and soil on the surface and picks up carbon dioxide gas, which mixes with water and creates carbonic acid.
Carbonic acid makes the little bubbles in soda pop, and it easily dissolves limestone. As the drop of water moves through the limestone, it etches out a tiny little piece of calcite. When it enters the cave, it has a few options. If it hangs from the ceiling for a long time, it will leave the calcite up there, forming a stalactite on the ceiling.
Stalagmites are generally made by faster dripping water. The water splashes down, leaving the calcite on the ground in a big pile. One way to remember which is which is that stalactites cling tight to the ceiling, and stalagmites stand up tall and mighty.
So when they grow together, that would be a mighty tight?
Not quite. When a stalactite and stalagmite meet in the middle, it's called a column. Also, sometimes the water drop slowly slides down an arched ceiling and leaves a snail's trail of calcite behind it. These thin lines of calcite are deposited on top of one another over and over again, making a thin, graceful, swervy drapery.
There are draperies all over the cave. They're my favorite decoration because they look so delicate and fragile, even though they're made out of rock.
Coming up next, we'll answer the question, do things fall in here? You don't need to worry about things falling in here. Today, things practically never fall. Thousands of years ago they did, but rarely. The boulder in front of you is called iceberg rock, and it was once attached to the ceiling. Continued erosion by dripping water finally loosened iceberg rock's grip on the ceiling.
All over the cave there are rocks and boulders that were part of the ceiling, but now, through natural processes, are on the floor. The term for that is breakdown.
But you don't need to feel nervous. Rock falls of this magnitude probably haven't occurred for thousands of years. The cave is very stable. There is no rain or strong wind, the temperature remains the same year-round, and the few earthquakes in this area weren't felt by people in the cave. That doesn't mean things don't fall now, but when they do, it's almost always caused by people.
Like in June of 2000, when some desk-sized boulders slid down onto the trail. Since rocks don't just break free from where they've been sitting for tens of thousands of years, something must have disturbed them. The only explanation is people, and the rocks most likely shifted because someone left the paved path and kicked something loose.
So in short, the answer to the question, do things fall in here, is both yes and no. No, not typically, and yes, very, very rarely on a geologic timescale.
Imagine the effort, engineering, and maintenance that have gone into the creation of a safe cavern trail system. It's a huge job. Most of the work is done by hand, and all of the materials have to be carried in. Over the years, trail routes, construction methods, and surface materials have changed. In fact, we're still experimenting with surface materials today. Further down the trail, we'll tell you about life in the cave and learn about the park's connection to outer space. Look around here. We see nothing here but water and rock. The sun never shines in here. No plants grow. It would be easy to think that there's no food and no life.
But there is. Even this far down in the cave, life thrives. We have cave crickets, mites, and even little spiders. They live by eating each other and eating what comes in with visitors. Each of us leaves behind lint, skin cells, hair, and dirt from our shoes. We'd ask you not to feed the animals, but I'm afraid you just can't help it.
There's also life that's invisible to the naked eye. Bacteria can be found throughout the cave. Some of these bacteria are pretty bizarre. There are even bacteria that survive here by eating rock. Here is Paul Berger, park hydrologist.
These pools are in complete darkness. There's no organic input. There's no streams washing in organic debris. So any microbes that were in the cave had to live on just what was there, the water, the rock, and each other. So a microbiologist came in and just put some sterile slides near a bunch of the pools and some of them partially in the pool just to see what was there. He found in a few of the pools in Lechuguilla Cave more biodiversity in those pools than the exact same square footage would be in the Amazon jungle.
But the bacteria have to protect their food sources by eliminating competition. So they produce enzymes that prevent the growth of other organisms. Scientists studying these enzymes have discovered that some of them attack cancer cells while leaving healthy cells alone.
So bacteria may lead to a cure for cancer, and that may not be their only benefit. NASA has conducted research in Lechuguilla Cave to learn about bacteria that live in extreme conditions. They want to know if similar organisms might be found living in other hostile environments, like Mars.
Carlsbad Cavern has had more than its 15 minutes of fame. This cave has appeared in a number of movies.
If you remember the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth starring Pat Boone, it was filmed in the King's Palace.
Other movies and TV shows filmed in the park include The Medicine Man, Gargoyles, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, King Solomon's Mine, and a television episode of Route 66. More recently, the Disney movie Atlantis included scenes which artists based on the cavern.
The King's Palace Tour is a ranger-guided tour that will take you into an especially beautiful and fragile part of the cavern. You can find out more in the Visitor Center.
Early visitors to Carlsbad Cavern had a much tougher trip. They walked all the way in, and they walked all the way out on a guided tour that took 4 to 5 hours.
You know, I suddenly have a real appreciation for the elevators.
They are a nice touch, all 4 of them.
Obviously, they haven't always been here. The shaft for the freight elevators was blasted in the 1930s, and the passenger elevators were installed in the 1950s. It took about 6 months to finish the 750-foot shaft. That's about 75 stories.
And if you think that's impressive, wait until you see what's coming up.
This place is huge. But in order to say how big it is, you first have to know how to measure empty space. Of course, when scientists and cavers talk about the size of caves, they could mean one of three things: the length, the depth, or the open space of a room. All three can be determined by surveying.
Here at Carlsbad Caverns, most of the mapping is done by volunteers with electronic surveying equipment. Some estimates measure the big room at about 14 football fields. Other measurements in the cave are more precise. It's 1,037 feet deep and over 30 miles in total length.
30 miles is a lot of cave.
As we continue to explore, we expect the mileage to increase.
Another cave here in the park, Lechuguilla Cave, is over 100 miles long, and we keep finding more each year. This is another beautiful area. Look at how delicate and fragile the decorations are. Those delicate decorations are made of calcite.
Stalactites are the ones that cling tight to the ceiling, and stalagmites stand up tall and mighty from the ground. They're made when dripping water carries calcite into the cave and deposits it. Slow drips leave deposits on the ceiling. More frequent drips leave calcite on the floor. Draperies look like fabric and grow slowly as water rolls down a sloping wall or ceiling. Do you know how quickly they grow?
Nobody knows the answer to that question. For one thing, formation growth is based on the amount of rain or snow on the surface. Rainfall is a wildly unpredictable thing. Add to that all the forces that act on rainfall above the cave, for example, gravity and evaporation, and you can see that it's pretty remarkable that any water gets into the cave at all.
Plus, surface climate changes bring about changes to the cave climate too. So there's absolutely no way for any stalactite to grow at a constant rate throughout its existence. Let's listen to Jason Richards, Environmental Protection Specialist.
We live in a desert. The Chihuahuan Desert is above us, and everything on top influences what happens down in the cave. So if it's very dry on top, everything's going to be very dry in the cave. Should we start getting a lot of moisture, then a lot of those formations will become active again.
So how old are these decorations? It's safe to say they're older than any of us, so please respect them by not touching them. We can only pause here for a moment, but look up, over your head. This stalactite has grown in an odd kind of way. Some people think it looks like a lion's tail. That lumpy, bumpy growth is called cave popcorn, and it's formed in a variety of ways.
One way is when moisture in the air carrying calcite condenses on a cave surface and evaporates, leaving the calcite behind. Popcorn is a very complex cave decoration. You can read more about cave popcorn and other cave decorations in books available at the Cavern Bookstore. You know, these formations look like dancing fairies.
Jim White thought so too. He was the first explorer to enter the cave in 1898 at the age of 16. He found his way in and out mostly with good skills, good memory, and good luck. To help him remember his way around, he gave decorations imaginative names. He saw fairies here, so he named this place the Fairyland.
Considering the names Jim gave to other areas of the cave, Devil's Den, Devil's Spring, it seems that he learned the cave was not as scary as he thought.
I like discovering shapes and characters in different formations. Let your imagination go, and you might see formations shaped like goblins, animals, people, even some of your relatives. Go ahead and try it. It's fun.
These trails sure are nice, but you can bet the first visitors didn't have it this easy. At first there was no path, just Jim White picking his way along a treacherous cave floor.
The only improvements were guano sacks used as a golden staircase in the cave. The basic trail route as we know it today was in place by 1930.
Wooden stairs were built down through the natural entrance and used for almost 30 years. And finally the walkway was paved, lighted, and lined with stones and handrails.
But Carlsbad Caverns wasn't always a national park. Carlsbad Cave National Monument was established in 1923. And then in 1930, Congress created Carlsbad Caverns National Park. It's one of the most incredible national parks in the entire system. We've come to a place in the cave where you'll need to make a choice. For these directions to make sense, please face the sign for the audio guide number marker. If you want to go back to the elevators and restrooms and leave the cave, turn left at this shortcut. That'll get you there in about 20 to 30 minutes.
But if you want to see Mirror Lake and the bottomless pit, just go right. You can expect another half-mile walk, and you'll get back to the elevators about an hour from now. We sure wouldn't see much of this room without the electric lights. With the lanterns and torches earlier visitors used, most of the beautiful decorations that we can see today probably weren't even noticed. Now there are more than 1,200 light bulbs in the cave, some of them in very hard-to-reach places. It actually takes special training to change a light bulb around here.
Some of the cave is well lit, but other parts are left in shadows. Lighting placement was designed by a theatrical lighting specialist who worked on Broadway. The idea is to show off the most beautiful parts of the cave, while keeping the cave, well, cave-like. The natural state of a cave is total, complete darkness. You can get a peek at what that's like on one of our ranger-guided tours.
It's sure a lot easier to see in the cave now than when the National Geographic Society first explored here. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Just before the park was established in 1923, a geologist named Willis T. Lee came here to investigate. Later, he led a National Geographic scientific expedition. They planned a 6-month expedition to map, survey, and explore the cave. It was harder than they thought it would be. Even with the help of Jim White, they completed only a 1-mile survey of the main corridor.
Elizabeth Lee, Willis T. Lee's daughter, was the first woman to explore the cave. She went along on the expedition, even leading the way.
So what's so special about this Lechuguilla Cave?
At well over 100 miles in length, Lechuguilla Cave is one of the longest caves in the world. Plus, it's relatively undisturbed and pristine, mostly because it has no natural entrance.
For years, cavers knew Lechuguilla Cave as Misery Pit, a deep hole in the ground that didn't go anywhere. Over the years, cavers reported wind blowing up through the rubble on the floor. There's a saying in caving, if it blows, it goes. Wind moving at 30 to 40 miles an hour was a pretty sure tip that there was a cave waiting to be discovered.
With permission from the National Park Service, some cavers began to dig through the rubble, and sure enough, they found a passageway. To keep the airflow in the cave as natural as possible, the National Park Service installed an airlock door. Even though it's been extensively explored, Lechuguilla is still one of the most undisturbed natural caves in the world, and the National Park Service is going to do everything it can to keep it that way.
Lechuguilla Cave is restricted to exploration and research, and then only by very experienced and ethical cavers. Every caver has to carry everything they need to stay alive, and they have to carry out everything they take in.
That's important because Lechuguilla Cave is like a cutting-edge laboratory. The cave may show us how to preserve the most special gift of all, life. We'll talk more about that in a while. But next, we'll tell you about a fascinating discovery here in this cave.
The water level of the pool in front of you is determined by the amount of surface water that can reach this point. Thousands of years ago, the surface climate was much wetter and there were a lot more pools. It takes at least 8 months, and often a lot longer, for water from rainfall to reach this pool.
Later, we'll tell you about how the answers to some of the mysteries of life may come from pools like Mirror Lake. Please don't contaminate the water by throwing coins or anything else in cave pools. It might be a good idea to stop here for a moment and think about all the things you've seen and learned today. The surprises and mysteries of the cave are kind of like this little alcove. It's obvious and well lit, but lots of people walk right by without ever really noticing it.
Look at the tiny, delicate details and smaller decorations. We talk a lot about what's biggest, longest, tallest, greatest, first, and best. Sometimes we forget to notice the beauty everywhere, even in the smaller places.
Time to make another choice. These directions to make sense, please face the sign for the audio guide number marker. To get to the elevators, the lunchroom, the restrooms, and the exit, turn right. To repeat your tour through the back side of the big room, take a left.
Look at how wet and shiny the Crystal Spring Dome is. It's one of the most active formations in the cave. In fact, from this point on, you'll find a lot more moisture in the cave. Water may not be dripping everywhere, but the cave is definitely still active.
Moisture levels have naturally fluctuated over the past several thousand years, and today, the arid climate of the Chihuahuan Desert means that very little water enters the cave.
But we've learned that most change in the cave comes from the actions of people. The National Park Service has built parking lots and buildings over the cave, which have changed the natural flow of water into the cave. In the future, some of the paved surfaces will be removed, and others will be replaced with materials that will let water pass through in a more natural way.
Something like that happened when the visitor center was constructed. The staff decided that it would be easy to cool the building with cave air by simply propping open the elevator doors. Before long, though, they noticed that cave pool water levels were dropping, and the problem was simple evaporation. So the doors were closed and revolving doors were installed, which took care of most of the problem.
Things like that are called unintended consequences. No one intended to change the water levels. It just happened. Today, the National Park Service takes a hard look at every action to make sure that they won't cause unintended changes in the cave or to other park resources.
Of course, sometimes changes in the cave occur naturally. We'll talk about that just ahead.
I love this area, especially the way the decorations are growing right on top of each other. I also like the way the pool is shaped, like a long bathtub.
The pool is a good place for us to learn more about research in park caves. Today, we know that bacteria live in the cave, especially near pools of water like this one.
How bacteria can survive without food or sun is another exciting discovery. Scientists have discovered that many of these bacteria produce enzymes that restrict the growth of other bacteria.
Cancer doctors and NASA scientists are the ones who are most interested in these extreme bacteria. Those enzymes are being studied for their ability to attack cancer cells while leaving healthy cells alone, perhaps leading to a cure for cancer. NASA scientists are studying bacteria because the way life exists in extreme environments may teach us a thing or two about the possibility of life on Mars.
So, inner space of caves may teach us about outer space. How about that?
Look at these colors. This is definitely one of my favorite spots. The colors come from minerals. Mostly there's calcite, the bright white rock you see. But you can see that many of the soda straws are sort of orange. That's because they've been stained by iron oxide.
Another color you've seen is black, which comes from manganese. This cave may not have a lot of color, but the colors are beautifully displayed. Sometimes you may see the color green. That's another unintended consequence. The lights in the cave happen to be the right wavelength to encourage green algae to grow. Another source of green might be coins corroding in the cave pools.
Have you seen any formations that resemble something else? Just around the corner is a section of the cave called the Zoo. With a few minutes and a little imagination, you'll see how it got its name. This is called the zoo because, with a little imagination, you can see all sorts of animals in the formations.
That's one of the best things about this cave. You can be a serious scientist, or if you prefer, you can be a kid again.
But please, don't feed the animals. This area is called the Chinese Theater. As you can imagine, this cave attracts global attention. Every year, visitors come from all over the world. Everyone seems to walk through the cave with the same awestruck expression. They seem to know that protection of the cave is important because of what their visit meant to them.
In 1995, Carlsbad Cavern was designated as a World Heritage Site. That means that Carlsbad Cavern belongs to all the citizens of planet Earth. It's a special place that ignites a spark of wonder and awe in each of us.
The National Park Service is proud of this honor and is committed to making sure that this treasure is here for the children and grandchildren of the world to experience just like you have today.
Let's listen to Tom Bemis, cave technician.
I consider caves to be one of the last frontiers on this planet. On the surface of the Earth, just pretty much everything's been explored now. But you get down underground or at the floor of the ocean, that's about all that's left.
We've seen some amazing sights, and we've learned some amazing facts about Carlsbad Cavern. It's been fun showing you my favorite scenes and having the chance to help create your memories.
We're back in the small end of the big room where you started. You might have had great expectations and a desire to learn something new about a part of your heritage. Now you've come full circle, and we hope the tour has lived up to your expectations, maybe even exceeded a few.
Thanks for letting us share this time with you. We hope you come back again soon. When you do, you'll find that the cavern hasn't revealed all of its secrets. You'll see things that you'll swear weren't here today, but they were. That's the magic of Carlsbad Cavern.
The elevators will take you back to the visitor center where you started. They cover the 750 feet to the surface in just under a minute.
If you'd like to learn more about Carlsbad Cavern or many of your other National Park Service areas, visit the Cavern Bookstore just across the lobby from the elevators. They have lots of publications, videos, music, and DVDs for all ages. You can even adopt your very own bat. The proceeds go to bat research and education here at the park. Thank you for allowing us to share your day, and come back soon.
For Carlsbad Caverns National Park, I'm Brad Kincaid.
And I'm Emily Baker.
Bye now.
See you soon.